So thank you very much, Olga. And yes, you're fully right. Hearing Steve before, I think we have walked a journey as a company, and it's nice to see, okay, how did it work in practice? But before I go into the journey, it might be good if I just give you a few highlights on the company itself to put it in perspective. So Danone is a big multinational, as you can see, over 100,000 employees and present in most parts of the world. And you can see some of the biggest countries we operate in the flags here. If I then also look to in what kind of product divisions are we operating, it's basically split into three divisions. Firstly, specialized nutrition, which is containing of medical nutrition and early life nutrition. Then secondly, essential dairy and plant-based products. So it's mainly also the Danone brand and all others you see here. And lastly, the waters business as a third division. And in the bottom here, you can see in all of them, we have a significant role, let's say, in the world. So what does it mean for such a multinational to walk a journey from budgeting to rolling forecast? And I really want to start in the old days. A bit fortunate, I can really talk about those old days because I started in the company in 1999. And when I look in the beginning of my career, it was really possible for a company to predict the world and what would go on around there. Even in some circumstances, we could influence, let's say, the future. So looking in that context, it really makes sense that you make a yearly budget, and a few times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, you look and you see where are we deviating from this budget and how do we cope with that. But quite quickly after, we saw that the world was more and more changing. So we needed to adapt what we were doing. So we did 2 things, basically. Firstly, we went to a midterm mandate, which goes up to 3 years on top of the budget, to link in with Steve, because business doesn't stop at year end. And secondly, to prevent that in March already, let's say your budget is outdated, we introduced risks and opportunities, at least to make sure that if things are changing, we could slightly adapt the scenario of our forecast as well. And then as of 2016, we made a way bigger step. We found ourselves in a VUCA world. So the letters stand for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in this VUCA world, we saw that it didn't work anymore to have a budget. So we really stopped budget. So we are part of the 0% of the pool, let's say. We kept the target, but really separated from any budget process. And we introduced rolling forecast, which basically meant that we were continuously looking 1.5 years in front of us, what we expect that could happen. Still managing risk and opportunities on top to have a bit of scenarios. And whilst keeping the midterm mandate, we introduced, let's say, full base scenarios on a best case and a worst case next to the expected situation. And then, and Olga mentioned that one, I think, COVID happened, and COVID changed everything. Basically, all that we had was not worth it anymore, and we had to reshape ourselves. We did 2 things. We're still working on that, basically, because it's quite a journey as well. But we looked at our organization. How can we be more close to business, more agile in this ever-changing world? And secondly, we wanted also to adapt our forecasting and targeting processes to not only go beyond budget, what we did with rolling forecast, but also even a bit beyond a rolling forecast. And I will come back to that in a later stage. But first, let's look at the budgeting process, because I want to share with you some pros and cons, because also pros of the original budget period. Because having a 1-year phase really links nicely with the yearly negotiation of our customers. Secondly, it gives a clear mandate and a clear target in itself. And lastly, because you're not continuously updating, you can be a bit more efficient throughout the year. However, there are also disadvantages, and the main ones I want to mention here is business did not stop at year end. I told you about that. Also the second one, that it can be outdated quite quickly. And lastly, and that's the ambiguity we talked about before, that it's really, if you use it as a target and you use it as a forecast to take the right investment decisions going forward, it's not the best estimate you can have. So that's why we stopped budget and we moved into beyond budget into rolling forecast. As you see here, that we managed it in 2 phases. On a monthly base, we forecasted for 6 quarters out our financial KPIs in a finance to finance discussion, so really kept within finance. But every quarter we would go way deeper on the same time frame, but we would include the full financials and also the business plans behind. In the end, going from a general manager to general manager discussion, from country to zone to the company ultimately. So way more business discussion. And also for this process, there are some pros and cons that I want to highlight for you. In terms of the advantages, as you will see, then you see here there are 3 things I want to mention. Firstly, we always have an updated forecast at hand when we need to at local or global level. Secondly, creating such a forecast creates also business involvement to be able to prepare it. And for me, really, a good forecast is not a finance process. It's a business process, and finance can have an orchestrating role in it somehow. And lastly, the discussion between the organizational layer by itself creates a commitment, which is good. On the other side, it's a very time-consuming exercise. We many times had the feeling in our company that whenever you finished your previous rolling forecast, you can already start immediately in your next one without even having the chance to understand, okay, but what are we seeing here? What can we learn from that? How can we improve ourselves going forward in business? Secondly, still also a rolling forecast will have a political message in itself, because it's also the way you communicate between layers. So it's not only purely what do we expect. And lastly, and I don't think I have to elaborate on that, with a major disruption, okay, everything changes. It makes sense. So learning from that last situation, we have decided to keep in a rolling forecast process, but to go a bit beyond by expanding certain axes. And I want to share with you 4 of them. The first one is that we are running a process to connect to the max all the databases we have available, internal between our different functions in the company, but also combining it with external data coming from market share information, customer data, whatever we can get, to be able to learn as much as we can for taking the right decisions going forward. Then a second point, we are even expanding more and more the use of non-financial data, and we have to. I'll give you one example. In one country, we had an issue that could have happened more often in the past. But because this issue really blew up into social media, actually, and it's true, within 1 year, we lost half of our business in that country. So today, in today's world, it's not only about your financial performance or your product. It's also about, okay, how are you perceived treating your environment? How are you perceived dealing with people? And it can have truly an impact on what you can expect going forward. Then the third one is one a bit mentioned before as well, is okay, need to focus more locally, being closer to business. And I can talk hours about decomplexifying the matrix organization. We'll not have the time here, but basically it means that we have been always organized into a geographical layer, and on the other hand also a product division layer. And what we are doing today is we are creating, instead of having 3 divisions in every country, to make that one country and really empower it to do the business close to where the business happens. And the last point I want to mention is need to focus on business, and it covers one of the disadvantages we saw in rolling forecast as we had it. We really want to reduce the frequency and the granularity of reporting, to be able to increase the focus on scenarios of understanding where we can go, and to really animate business by trying to understand what we are doing.